So I turned 2 billion into 8 billion. I started with nothing.
Emil, a legendary executive and operator. He joined Uber as the chief business officer, a company that is now worth $160 billion.
We were essentially illegal everywhere. In Las Vegas, he has a SWAT team with machine guns take the driver out of the car to arrest them. In Milan, which is like true taxi mafia, they printed posters all over the city with their face on it saying, "Kill this one."
2017, benchmark, the board fired you and Travis.
Yeah.
What was that like?
It was one of the saddest times of my life. They knew to get to the king, you got to take out the general. 10 days later, he was out. Uber raised 15 billion. Benchmark invested 33 million. 14 billion of those dollars were pissed. They invested in us.
What are some of the best lessons that you learned from Travis?
The most important thing I learned from him was this courage to be ambitious. Start with the end in mind and just like keep going until you're stopped.
What's the downside of all this? What is up, guys? Welcome back to the World Class Podcast. Today, I sit down with a legendary executive and operator, Emil. Emil was the former SVP at Tell Me Networks, a company that he helped sell for over $600 million in the early 2000s. Shortly after, Emil joined Uber as the chief business officer alongside Travis Kalanick and helped this startup grow into one of the greatest tech juggernauts in the world, a company that's now worth $160 billion. And in this conversation, we dive deep into what it takes to build an iconic organization that changes the world, how to build winning cultures, and the negotiation secrets that Emil's used to close multi-billion-dollar deals. So without further ado, let's dive in. Emil, welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
I've been looking forward to this for at least a month now. Look, I'm so excited to dive into your Uber story. I think that's what you're famous for, and there's so much wisdom in there. But before we dive into your story, all the tactics and all that, can you just give us a little context? What do we have to understand about your childhood, your early years, to understand who you are now?
So I was born in Egypt. And my family, Christian family, so there was a diaspora of Christians in Egypt, which is 90% Muslim country in the 70s. So my dad had applied for a green card 3 times. You know, went to U.S. Embassy and they make you pay just to interview, and he got rejected. So like, you know, you're spending a month's salary just to interview, but got lucky on the 3rd try. So he came to U.S. and like lived in the YMCA until we found an apartment, and then brought my mom and me over. So I grew up speaking Arabic and learned English alongside my family. And we went to public school in New Rochelle, which is a suburb of New York. So you find a lot of people, especially in the tech world, who are immigrants, who have like an immigrant way of looking at the world, which is everything's possible, everything's optimistic, so long as you work hard, like the one requirement. And so you kind of take that with you, or I took that with me at least, and I think many people do have that experience. Because you don't want to waste it. You're like, parents made all these sacrifices and so on, right?
Yeah.
And so I lived in New Rochelle, went to public school, and then I went to Harvard before it was like a crazy place to be, like it is now. And then I went to Stanford Law School thinking, oh, I'd be a lawyer. I want to go into government, politics, and public service. And then I just, I was like, nah, it's not quite for me. I don't want to get paid by the hour like a lawyer does. So, but I graduated from law school in 1998, and I was in Stanford. And that's when the tech revolution, like Amazon had started 2 years before.
What year was that roughly?
98.
98, okay.
Right, so
right before they took off.
Like right in the early days, the beginning of the dot-com bubble.
Yeah.
And so my second and third year of law school, I basically didn't go to class. I was working on startups. I was working with Tony Hsieh, who ended up starting Zappos on his first company. I met all these guys who were coming up who became a thing. And then I was like, okay, well, I need to pay these student loans off. So I went back to Goldman Sachs for a year to be a banker.
How was that?
Not good. Mainly because I was competing against MBAs and I was a lawyer. And I was like, and I need to pay the loans off, but I was like, fuck it. Screw it. I'm going to go back to San Francisco for this startup called Tell Me Networks that my fraternity brothers from Harvard were starting.
Okay.
Right? Speech recognition software in the cloud. And it was essentially Siri before we had smartphones.
Okay.
You would speak to it and it would give you answers from the internet, was the idea. So that's kind of how I started. That's how I got to tech.
That's how you got into tech.
That's how I got
You
to tech.
came here with nothing. Your dad was a hardworking immigrant.
Yeah.
You had that mindset. You saw an opportunity in tech. All right, this is the thing.
Yeah.
Like, not going to be a lawyer. Going to go all in tech. Then you had that connection with your Harvard guy.
Yeah.
Joined Tell Me Networks. And what was your role at Tell Me Networks in that journey like?
I was director of business development. You know, it was like, okay, what does Emil do? Who knows? It's like, what business development, right? And it was literally in a garage. We'd like open the garage every day to go to work. But I was like eager. I was like 26. I was hungry. And, you know, I started selling. I started learning how to raise money. So my first round that I raised was 6 months after I joined. I raised $60 million from AT&T. Because this idea was we had this internet on the phone, so we needed like free phone minutes. I used to pay for long distance calls back then. So we did a equity for minutes kind of deal. So I went to New Jersey, where AT&T was headquartered, Basking Ridge, New Jersey. And I lived for 57 days in the AT&T Learning Center Hotel. And I didn't come back until I had ink on paper. And that was
your mindset. You're like, I'm going to go there and I'm not coming back without a deal.
Not coming back. And the CEO, Mike McHugh, fired our general counsel during the middle of it. So I had to like do the lawyering. I hired an outside
You had the legal background.
I had a little bit of legal background, so that helped. And so that's when I learned, okay, to be a real great deal person, the more skills you have, finance, accounting, learning how to do a spreadsheet, some legal, and I could teach any business person who didn't go to law school enough legal to do a deal.
Enough to be dangerous.
Enough to actually treat lawyers like they work for you as opposed to you work for them. That's the key difference. Because lawyers get paid by the hour, so they're not motivated to get deals done quickly.
Yeah.
Right.
That makes sense. A little bit of misalignment of incentives there.
Yeah. So, and then you had to have some charisma and some ability to persuade, so people want to be around you, and some ability to tell a story. And, you know, so it was crash course. And that was sort of like the beginning of my learning about how to do what I ended up perfecting at Uber. I started learning.
Right, because at Uber, we'll get there soon. You raised $15 billion in 2 years. So this is your first big round, $60 million now. Yeah. How did you learn how to do that? Was it just trial by fire, just figuring shit out? Or like, did you have some mentors? Were you reading books? Like, how did you accelerate your learning curve so fast?
You know, the only book I read when I joined the tech industry was how the internet works. It was like Internet for Dummies, because I needed to know like what servers were. I didn't, again, remember 1998. So
it's brand new.
But it's brand new. Everyone's trying to figure out how data moves around the world, how it comes through telephone lines, because we used to have DSL at home. That's how you got internet. But in terms of deal making, it was trial by fire. It was, they have something we want. We used John Doerr, who was the preeminent venture capitalist in the world at that time.
Yeah.
He was invested in Tell Me, got to make a call to the CEO of AT&T. So that I used. That was something I couldn't do, and I needed someone's help.
Right.
And they said, okay, let's put our teams together and make a deal. And then it was trial by fire when the teams got together to make a deal. But it was a pretty cool experience. 57 days, even today, is a good amount of time. It was like not too shabby to get a $60 million deal done.
That's a pretty good 26-year-old. So that was a great first deal. But before we get into Uber, tell me about the ultimate deal here, where you actually sold the company to Microsoft. Well, how did that go down?
Yeah, so here we are in 1998, 99, did this deal, raised another $100 million like a year later. So these numbers were extraordinary in the late 90s, right? Yeah. Extraordinary. Then the internet bubble crashed, 2001. And our business model wasn't working. The idea was like you'd call up and say, you know, here's the Yankees score. And by the way, here's an advertisement for Pepsi. People didn't want to listen to ads while they're on the phone. So we had to shift our business model to enterprise. So we started selling speech recognition software to companies for their customer service lines. In fact, they're still running today at Amex. If you call Amex or Fidelity, that's Tell Me.
They're still running it.
Yeah, for 20 years.
Wow.
So we had this pile of money, so we were able to survive the bust. And we had to shift our business model. So I turned from a business dev guy into a sales guy. I carried a bag for 7 years. went and we're selling to enterprises, buy our service for X cents a minute or whatever. And I learned how to sell, which is a little different than deal making, right? They have money, you want it. That's what sales is. And so I carried a bag, and we got this company after 7 years in 2006 to like 100 million in revenue, which again was a lot of money at the time.
That's serious revenue.
And we had a competitor that made an offer called Nuance, which Microsoft also ended up buying. And the guy who introduced me to Tell Me had left, but he was buddies with Steve Ballmer. He went jogging with Steve Ballmer once a quarter. And I was like, okay, you got to please tell Steve Ballmer that he's got to talk to Tell Me because I have this other bid on the table. And he's like, I said, for every minute you talk about Tell Me, that's worth $100 million to this company. So I was pumping him up. He got us the meeting. We flew up to Redmond and sat in the room with Ballmer, and I pulled out my BlackBerry. And at this point, iPhone hadn't launched. It just had launched. It was something like that. So you had a BlackBerry or you had a Windows phone, which was garbage. But Steve's competitive.
Right.
Put my BlackBerry on the table. He takes his sparkling water, knocks it over on my BlackBerry, and just stares at me. Basically, like, don't ever bring someone else's product into my house. So,
wow.
I was like,
what was going on in your mind at the time? Were you just completely caught off guard and flustered? Or
I was cool. I was like, no, keep it cool.
You were just cool. You're like, all right, no problem.
Sorry, Steve.
I'll get a new phone.
I forgot. Yeah. I mean, I didn't want to show weakness, right? I was like, but we had me and the CEO. The other two guys were like mouth open, staring, and I was like, keep it together, guys. And then, but Steve's actually a great guy, and that was sort of poured out his personality. And within 48 hours, I turned what was a bid from another company for about 300 million into 670 million. And then within 3 days after that, I got 760 million. And that was a huge win. And it was 2007, we closed that deal. Had we waited until 2008 when the great financial crisis, that company would have been worth nothing.
Perfect timing.
What
would you say was the secret sauce there to literally double your valuation in a week?
People respond, and Travis taught me this too, and we'll talk about that later. The most powerful force in business is having competition for something, right? Competition for this asset. We were an asset at the time. And when you have a technology asset, especially in the mid-2000s, where big companies were afraid of new companies disrupting them, like truly afraid, another offer comes in, they react and they move fast. And that dynamic means you can do price discovery, I call it. What's your limit? And some people tried to hide it. I was like, as transparent as I could be. I was like, here's what this offer is. I don't like that company, but if they offer more, I got to take it. It's just more. More is more.
I like you, but not that much.
Yeah, but if you could match it, then I have an argument. And if you could beat it by a little, then I could literally say no, and I could sign it online, and we could put that to bed. So it's creating some trust with each side, creating an auction-like environment, and if you can do that, you can maximize price. If you don't, not only do you have deal risk that deals fall apart, but you're never going to maximize val. And I tell entrepreneurs that all the time now who are in these situations. It's very dangerous to have a single-threaded, binary outcome track, because it might not close, and if it closes, it's not going to be good.
Yeah, and you have no bargaining power.
Got
it. Okay, that's super.
And it'll show.
You'll feel it. Your energy will communicate the desperation.
Yeah, the truth and your energy both together, because you can't fake it. If you try to fake it and you get caught, it's a zero, right? They're like, oh, we don't want to acquire someone that's not honest.
Yeah.
So you have to be honest about it, and then you also have to be confident about it too. So that's the lesson.
Would you meditate, or how would you get yourself in the state for these negotiations? What did you do to prep your mind?
I was a pack-a-day smoker, so it was the opposite of meditation.
Just nervously smoked cigarettes and then went in there and killed it.
Yes, that was the thing.
Wow.
Thank God I quit 7 years ago, but that was the crutch, right? That was the
That just kept your nerves down so you could stay focused.
Yeah.
Little nicotine buzz.
Yep. That's what it was.
All right. Hey, that's real. The truth will set you free.
Yeah.
So after Tell Me, you sold it, got a massive win there. How did you get in touch with Travis? Like, how did this Uber thing come about?
So after that, I was exhausted. That was a 9-year journey. And at the time, and carrying a bag for 9 years, living in hotels, you're platinum on every airline, but like your body's also like the opposite of platinum. It's like you're bronzed out. I don't know what you call it, but so I took some time off and I applied for something called the White House Fellowship, where they take 10, 12 people a year. And it was started in Lyndon Johnson administration. They take them from business, medicine, all these other areas, and they say, we're going to put you at the top of the government. We're going to attach you to a cabinet secretary for 1 year, so you could learn how public service works and government works. And then the idea is you bring that ethic back to your profession. So a very prestigious thing. Colin Powell had done it. A lot of well-known people had done it. So I got selected and I did it. And I got attached to the Secretary of Defense in 2009 during the Iraq and Afghanistan war.
Wow.
Yeah. So I spent a ton of time in Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, Guantanamo Bay. We were organizing sort of the prison system down there, bringing technology to pay Afghani soldiers so it wouldn't get stolen by the warlords, all kinds of cool stuff. I was the
That
tech
is
guy.
cool. So your remit was like use technology to create solutions in these troubled places?
That was one of the remits. It's like, better than us what tech is. So like where there's tech thing, you fill in. I also did a massive budget cutting exercise there, which was, our troops were underfunded. We had things like, again, I don't want to go too off track, but remember IEDs, improvised explosive devices, right? There was a road between the Kabul airport and Kabul city where our tanks were getting just blown up by like really, primitive devices. And so it turns out one of the things to limit that was to make a V-shaped hole on the bottom of every tank. And Secretary of Defense was like, figure it out. We have to break through the bureaucracy. All we have to do is put 2 pieces of metal on the bottom of a truck and it saves lives. So I learned how to like weave through the bureaucracy to do that. I learned where a lot of waste was. So I did a $100 billion budget cutting. So I did all kinds of things in 1 year. It was like the most.
So this
intense.
is pretty foundational to the work you'd have to later do at Uber, dealing with governments.
And that's how I got to Uber, because ironically, Benchmark was also invested in Uber. In Tell Me. And
okay. So they knew what you'd done there.
They knew what I'd done.
Hey, we got a new CEO. Your experience in operating and working with governments, like we should probably meet this guy.
Yes, exactly that. It was like, this company's going to have a lot of government stuff to deal with, and we know how you built a business. Meet Travis. And Travis came to DC to meet me because he was on a tour there. Uber had launched like 2 cities.
Uber was pretty. What size was Uber when you first got
10
it?
people.
Oh, it was brand new.
Brand new.
This is on the ground floor.
Right. And I liked Travis a lot. We got along, and I was like, but Travis, I just don't get how a black car service for rich people is going to be big. And so I waited like a year. Biggest mistake of life. Had I joined at 10 people as opposed to 150 people, it would have been better off. But Travis and I stayed friends. We went on double dates. I moved to San Francisco. I joined this other company, Clout. I hung around there for a little bit, and I kept thinking about Uber. Couldn't get it out of my head. And then they launched UberX, which was the everyman product. Everyman could drive an UberX because it could be a Toyota Prius, and the price was that every person could afford it. And now I saw it. I was like,
you saw the vision now.
I saw the vision now.
So what was the interview process like? Because Travis is an intense guy, right? Like this guy, like how did that go down? What was the interview process for him to select you for this critical role?
Yeah. So in some ways there was no interview process because we became friends.
You had a year of interviewing,
right,
getting to know each other.
But then I came to him and say, okay, I'm ready now. He's like, okay, you're ready. This is classic Travis. He's like, okay, you're ready. What do you want to do? Like, show me what you got, basically. So I proactively put together an 8-page PowerPoint presentation on my own. I was like, here's what I think we should do. And he's like, okay, come in, let's do a whiteboard session. And we jammed on ideas about growth and what this could be. Yeah. And we came out with this phrase being like, we're going to build the urban logistics fabric for every city in the world. That means it could take people, things, food from one point in the city to another in the cheapest way possible everywhere in the world.
So you already saw the future vision. Like it wasn't just logistics, it was food, it was other services. You're talking about a whole infrastructure.
Yes.
You saw that early.
He saw it, and I got it, and I like we were pushing each other.
You're
to
like,
how
I
far
can
this
figure
go.
out how to make this a reality with you. So what was your initial role? What did you discuss? Like, all right, you're coming on board, Emil. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah. So again, this was a good where he and I gelled. It's like I had pretty low ego, and he said, let's call you SVP of business, not business development, not business affairs, just business.
Yeah. Okay.
And that means that you're going to be the face to all businesses in the world. I was like, okay, not clear what that means. And by the way, you get no team. You come in solo.
Wow. So you were like this secret weapon. They're just going to send you in places.
Yeah. And I said to him, do you need help fundraising? He's like, no, I got that. I was like, okay, do you need help doing M&A? He's like, no, I got people who do that. Like, okay, I'll come in and I'll figure out what my own role is. And that's another thing I tell young people today. When you get on a rocket ship, don't get over focused on title or remit once you get there, because these companies change so much so fast that if you're adaptable and smart and hardworking, you'll carve out your space. And so I started with nothing, with no team, no remits essentially, and 4 years later to the day, I'd led fundraising for $15 billion. I ran Uber China. I built the Uber for business, enterprise business. I was sort of CEO of that. I became a trusted advisor across all dimensions of the business. And I had a team of a couple hundred people that were doing this all over the world, because we launched in 170 countries, and we launched food delivery, and we launched package delivery. So it was the most intense, great experience. I had the best partner in the world in Travis, because we were both like very aligned on pushing forward.
Yeah.
On every dimension all the time at once.
Because you were running so many projects in parallel, right? You're trying to blitz and just open up as many cities, capture as much market share. We'll get into Lyft later, but I know they're coming up behind your heels, and you got to move fast. So what was your playbook for opening up new cities?
I wasn't operationally in charge of opening up new cities. The way I came in was, how do we go into India, which has 50 cities, or China that has 100 cities, or new countries or regions, because we were essentially illegal everywhere.
Right. Yeah. This is going to be interesting to dive into.
So everyone gave criticism to Uber. It's like, oh, you're illegal. You're like, look, it was an unjust law. Why is it a just law that I can't have someone give me a ride to the airport for money? Why is it only the taxi system, which is smaller than it should be in every city in the world, controlled by a mafia that has medallions, that have essentially indentured servitude in these poor drivers who basically have to lease the car from the taxi medallion guy for $700 a week, which means if they don't get $700 in fares, they're out money. As opposed to taking a revenue share for someone who already owns a car, who's being unused, who wants to earn money for Valentine's Day or to buy books for school or whatever. It was democratizing. And so it was the unjust laws. And I'll give you some flavor. I love telling these stories. So in Korea, there's a law that says you could get in an Uber or a chauffeured car, so long as the passenger is not Korean.
Interesting.
In Miami Beach, you could get a chauffeured car, but you have to wait an hour before he shows up. A law. So the driver could be at your doorstep. You're not allowed to get in that car for an hour.
Makes no sense.
In LA, they had a dress code down to the color of socks you could wear as a taxi driver or a limo driver.
Wow.
In Germany, they had a rule that said, if a car drives you to the airport, it can't pick up someone at the airport and take them back to the city. It has to go home to base before you go back, which breaks the business model. All kinds of crazy rules to block, our model. So my job was to find allies in these countries, whether they ran companies, whether they were politicians, to support a movement that would get the people what they wanted. We always had the power of the people behind us. And knowing that people were like, you are not taking away my Uber to their politicians once we launched. So our strategy was launch, let people fall in love with the service. Yeah. Then the laws were changed. And today, I think 7 billion people in the world have legal ride sharing services.
Wow.
Right?
So I have a question here. Did you launch Uber and then use the momentum of the people to get the legislation changed? Or did you go up front to the legislators, change the laws to then launch
No,
Uber?
the first. We
Wow.
launched first.
That must have been. Did you have any like? I imagine you were met with some serious anger and some hostility. I'm curious. What were the craziest countries to open up, and what were some of the craziest shit that you had to deal with?
I mean, gosh, there's so many stories. So in Las Vegas, in our country,
Okay.
we launched, and it wasn't compliant with all the rules. A police officer calls an Uber. Poor driver comes in. He has a SWAT team with machine guns take the driver out of the car to arrest him as if he's a violent criminal. In France, there was a nationwide strike blocking every highway, burning cars to block Uber. And they arrested our general manager there and charged him with a felony. In Italy, in Milan, which is like true taxi mafia, and we had a female GM there. They printed posters all over the city with her face on it saying, "Kill this woman."
Wow.
So there was no joke. And the only countries today which don't have proper Uber still, Germany, Italy, Spain, South Korea, and Japan.
That's it.
That's it.
So what was you mentioned you had to go find allies, right? Like, what was your strategy there? Like, we were like, who do I know through my networks? Let me just cold outreach these guys. Let me figure out what their political views are and see if they might be, for the people and be a part of this mission. Like, how did you go about finding those allies that were powerful enough to actually change legislation?
We would go into a place like India, and we were a hot company now. Like, Travis is on the cover of all these magazines.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It was easier to get meetings than the average startup. But we'd go find the chairman of Tata Motors, who builds all the cars. And we say, like, look, we want our drivers to buy more Tata cars. And here's what we do. And he'd be like, yeah, that makes all the sense in the world. And that guy talks to the prime minister all the time. And then we do this with the banks and say, like, we want to do electronic payments. And that guy would talk to the prime minister of finance all the time. We surround it. It was like a gang tackle. Anyone of prominence that we could support. And by the way, no one's opposed to ride sharing except for people who wanted the status quo for whatever reason, or were getting donations from the right people. Mm-hmm. So there were natural supporters. We just had to find them and put pressure on them. And, we would go talk at conferences and make sure that we got to shake hands with Prime Minister Modi. Like, I would make sure, I was like, Travis, you have to walk here
and shake
his hand, get a picture taken, so that the legislators down here are like, holy cow, Travis is talking to Modi. Maybe I should like just cave on this.
Right.
So it was all the tactics you could possibly imagine.
Yeah.
To get important people in these countries to support what we were doing.
You guys had fires going off left and right? Like just shit going down. Yeah. Maybe, I don't know, more than any company I've ever heard of. Totally. It's just a Herculean effort. Yeah. Internally, right? I imagine not everyone has the same hardcore mindset. Maybe they do, but maybe not as hardcore as you and Travis. But they're like, all this shit's going down, I should probably bail. Or like, how did you guys foster a culture where people had the grit, the tenacity to stick through all this bullshit you had to deal with, to actually see this through?
Yeah. I would say that we selected for that as much as possible up front in the interview process. We had like over time we developed a playbook for interviewing and selecting and hiring people.
Yeah, okay.
Right? So how do you select for people who have grit, who have tenacity, who are analytical enough, who have courage? And, I developed my own method for business people. We had method for operations people, for engineers. Mm-hmm. And we were religious about putting every single person through that filter. And of course, you make mistakes.
Sure.
But those people don't last. Like, they don't want to be there. The other beneficial factors, our stock price is going like this. So,
like, yeah, maybe we should jump on too.
I'm okay. Yeah, let's do this. Yeah. So even if you were like not that energetic and hardcore, you became that way because it was financially made sense to do that. But we did a really good job. And at the end, we were criticized for that culture. But that's what you needed to build that kind of business.
To disrupt the world.
Yeah. So it's like everyone wants everyone to be nice. You're like, sure, but then we wouldn't have been anywhere. Those 7 billion people have ride sharing today. Wouldn't be that. It would be 1 billion, or it would be something much less. And this service, like, How many people? You know how many people in New York took Ubers to their babies for the hospital instead of paying for an ambulance? How many drunk driving accidents were halted? Drunk driving rates are going down all over the world, in large part due to Uber.
Yeah.
How many people were able to get to a job that they weren't able to get to before, and how we're waiting on the train schedule and the subway's busted? Like there was a lot. Like, if you're a black person in New York trying to get a cab, it was a nightmare. It is a nightmare still, not with Uber, right? So we gave people freedom and time back and money back. And we created a whole class of people who could work when they wanted to work. And so, the culture created that. And yes, it's easy to look back and say, wow, I wish the culture wasn't as hardcore. You're like, okay, well, then you didn't want the end product.
It's the most hardcore culture. And, I run a recruiting company, and like we always talk about go poach people from vintage Uber, right? Like 2013 to maybe 2016. Yeah. Is like the prime time. If anyone made it through those times, everyone's like, they're a certified G, right? Like, make sure you get them in your company. Right. So I'm just curious. I know it's different for the different skill sets, whether it's engineering or business, but like, were there any patterns you saw of like the backgrounds and type of people that you hired that had the most success? Were they really seasoned people? Were they up and comers from particular backgrounds, or who would you say were just in general, like some of the most impactful hires?
Yeah. We always defaulted to up and comers, right? So because seasoned people, or people who are like already made it, they have their own playbook. They came in with their own way, their view of how the world should work, and it was hard for them to say like, well, this is just a different thing, and adapt. Mm-hmm. An up and comer doesn't have as many developed habits to break. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that was the default. Mm-hmm. But for people who are experienced, what I checked for was humility and confidence. Like, could they walk the line of humility and confidence? And the reason I say that is, if you're a person who was 45, who was an MD at Goldman Sachs, and I put you in the corp dev group, you had to have humility that these young people had done an amazing job. And you're not coming in to tell them, hey, I'm the adult in the room. You're coming to say, like, I'm going to add to what you built, right? And that takes a certain amount of humility. And on the confidence side, it was so hard that you had to get up every morning and feel confident that you were doing the right thing for the company, for yourself, for the world. And people who are able to have that characteristic in the right balance made it, whether they were senior or junior. But often senior people, like, you hired someone from Amazon who's like renowned for doing whatever. They had a playbook. They didn't, and they came in and it was like, I have to clean up the mess these kids made, that kind of thing. And that didn't work.
The lack of humility, their ego became the blocker to their growth. Yeah. In this new environment.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah. Lyft, $6 billion company today. Uber.
If they raised $10 billion. So it's worth less than they've raised.
Not a great outcome. Uber, $160 billion market cap today.
Yeah.
Why such a big difference?
Ambition. We started at the same time. With that first conversation I had with Travis when I was about to join the company about becoming an urban logistics fabric, the dream, the ambition to make it work and to make it work all the time, everywhere in the world at the same time, meant that we were pushing into other countries, into other business lines. Lyft stuck to their knitting. Rideshare in the U.S., no food delivery, no South America, no Asia, no China, no Russia, no Europe, no nothing. So the ambition, eventually resulted in this market cap differential. And we were faster. So speed and ambition, meaning, okay, I have this ambition, I have to fuel it with money. So I'm going to go out and get money as the biggest pile you could possibly imagine, every time I have the opportunity to fuel the ambition. They did it defensively. Like, let's raise money when we need it. We're like, we know we're going to need it because we have this ambition, so we're going to go raise it. Yeah.
Everything was now. It needs to happen now.
Everything was now. So ambition and speed and urgency, I think, were the difference between this like 20x market cap thing, a decade later.
It's incredible. It's sometimes you think it's all these complexities, but it's just having a bigger vision. It's more inspiring. You got a 10x vision, you can attract 10x talent.
Yeah.
And you just move with urgency and you attract all the killers.
Yeah.
And you just move 10 times faster and look at the market cap difference.
And you'll have more failures.
You will, huh? Because you're moving faster.
Because you're moving faster. You're making decisions faster with imperfect information. You wait for perfect information.
You end up like Lyft.
You end up like Lyft.
I'm curious, what is the single greatest deal you've ever done? What is the single biggest partnership or deal you've executed that you're the most proud of?
Probably the one that was the hardest but most satisfying at the end was the deal we did in China when we merged Uber China with Didi. And actually, the press said Uber lost. Uber lost in China. And I did that deal. And what it was we created a separate entity called Uber China. We'd hired about 1,000 Chinese locals to run the business, and they bled Uber black. And it was a local competitor, Didi, and the Chinese tech companies at that point were still copying U.S. business models and just applying them to a population of 1.3 billion. So you can make a big copycat business there. And relations between U.S. and China were fine then. They weren't as like fraught as they are now.
Yeah.
And we invested $2 billion in China. And every one of our investors was like, you guys are crazy. They don't allow Facebook here. They don't allow Instagram. They don't allow no tech company. You'll never win.
Yeah.
And so I did this combo deal where in May of 16, I raised one check of $3.5 billion from the Saudis, PIF, their sovereign wealth fund. It was their first big investment in a U.S. tech company. The next day, I called my counterpart at Didi, which was the Chinese competitor, say, I'm willing to blow this all in China unless we have a deal.
Negotiating power.
Yeah.
You have options.
That's right.
I got this money.
Yes.
We can strike a deal, or I can use this for something else.
Yes. And I'm willing to do it. And we were, and actually I wasn't, but Travis was. So
yeah, he's like, just get this shit done.
No, he was willing to blow it all. He's like,
oh, really?
Oh, yeah. I was nervous, right? He's much more of a risk taker than I was. I was a good balance him in that respect. But he, as a CEO, was like, I'm willing to blow this on China. So Travis is willing to blow this on China. We should have a final conversation to see if we have a merger or not. We met. She flew to San Francisco. She was worried about listening devices, about cameras. I could lower the shades in the room. I left my phone outside, and I couldn't bring anyone. And her whole team, and I had to spend 2 days going to this secret hotel, building trust that she could trust me. If there was a deal, I could get it done. And after a few days, she let me bring one of my corp dev guys in, and we'd spend another 2 days. So it was like 4 days of intense negotiation, and we kind of had a handshake. And she said, let's all fly to Macau. Again, a secret mission into Macau. You're trying to show respect that I was willing to travel all the way to Macau, just like she flew all the way to San Francisco. And in Asian business cultures, face and reciprocity are very important. So showing respect is important. And that was one of the things I learned at Uber. It's like cultural respect when you're doing business is a very important ingredient. And we had lawyers in the room and us, and we walked out with a term sheet in 2 days. And so from right after Memorial Day weekend to August 2nd, which is 63 days, we had a merger completed. We ended up owning 20% of them, which is worth $8 billion. So I turned $2 billion into $8 billion.
In 63 days.
In 63 days. And the press was
not
Uber
bad.
lost in China.
Sounds like a big L for you, Emil.
I'll take those L's all day long.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Talk to me, and we're going to get into a bit more of your tactics here shortly, but talk to me about a lot of founders with big visions are like, all right, do I raise capital? Do I not raise capital? Who do I raise capital from? I know you got some opinions on venture capital. What's your take on this?
It's a much different environment than it was when Uber was raising money, right? The free money era, we took advantage of that every second we could. And that ended in 22. Yeah. But from 13 to 22, if you had a big vision, there's a lot of FOMO by investors out there. So you had a lot of choices, right? Mm-hmm. But the early choices you make when you're first starting a company and those investors who end up sitting on your board, the later investors don't want to sit on your board.
The board.
Right. The investors who take a board seat. Those can be catastrophic decisions. They can be excellent decisions. And that decision of who that person and that firm are extremely consequential in the early part of your business because they only show up as problems 4 or 5 years later.
So how do you choose the right people?
Reputation. You have to do reference checking on them. Mm-hmm. And enough founders don't do that. And many founders rely on the reputation of the firm.
It's the person at the firm.
It's the person at the firm. The firm matters too, but the firm matters too. You like, oh my God, I got a term sheet from Sequoia or Benchmark or Kleiner.
Yep.
That's great. Who's the person and what is that firm's track record in tough situations? Not easy situations, tough situations. And that's something that if you do and you have the courage, you might choose someone who's a little less prominent.
Because you know they're going to stick by you.
Because they're going to stick by you.
Because 2017, Benchmark, the board, did a little bit of a coup, fired you and Travis from Uber.
Yeah.
That must have been a tough moment. What was going through your head at that time? What was that like?
It was like one of the saddest times of my life.
Was that the lowest low of your Uber journey? Like when that finally culminated?
Yeah, because ironically, Benchmark had introduced me to Uber and Travis. And Bill Gurley from Benchmark, who sat on our board, he and Travis didn't have a great relationship, but Bill and I did. We'd talk multiple times a day. I would make sure that I treated him with respect. And I made sure that he got credit for finding Uber. And he wanted to be helpful, and I made sure that he felt like he was helpful. And so for him to turn on me after all I'd done, his wife had asked me, like, please, when you guys get big, make sure you don't remove Bill Gurley. I was like, why would I do that? Like, why, if he's helpful and like loyal to us, like I'd never do that. Like people who brought you to the dance, you stay with them at the dance. And so I had all this built up goodwill with him, even if Travis and him weren't on the wrong side, for him to throw me under the bus. And what it ended up being was they found an expense report from 2014, not from me, from one of my employees who was working in Korea, and the receipt was written in Korean, so no one could read it. And my assistant, I learned early on in life, don't ever approve expense reports. I said, my assistant, do it. And they were like, you are responsible for that expense report.
That was the scapegoat, essentially.
Yeah, that was the BS sort of like, we need a reason. And the rest of the board was like, this is BS. So it was only Benchmark. And so the way they designed it, and it was quite clever, is we had an investigation at the time for all the stuff that was happening at Uber. They made 13 recommendations, and letting go of me was one of them. And you could only vote yes or no on the entire set of recommendations, not individually. So they designed it to push me out. And they also knew I was a lawyer, and I knew all the big investors. And I was able to protect Travis if I was there from a corporate governance standpoint. And so they got me out because they knew to get to the king, you got to take out the general. 10 days later, he was out. And they took the fact that his mom died and he was and his dad was in the hospital. They took advantage of sort of,
that low point in his life.
Low point in his life to get me out and him out within the span of 10 days. It was cruel. It was bad for the business. He'd agreed to take a leave of absence, Travis. I was super shocked. And they left no one in charge of a $70 billion company. It was run by committee for 3 months. So they didn't have a plan. There was just get these guys out.
How did that change you? Like, how did that change the way you saw the world, business, and how you've conducted yourself since?
It made me more paranoid, sadly, about people's motivations when big dollars are at stake. When big dollars are at stake, people behave way differently no matter how well you know them. And therefore, the friendships and relationships you build along the way are really important, because you can determine who that kind of person is earlier on, and I didn't, and I regret that. But I know that I have my ride or die folks, and I'll never not be on the motorcycle with them, right? Never. And you add some over time, but if testing for whether people have that sense of loyalty, sense of commitment to make it through hard times is like a filter that I use with everything now, for good or bad.
Did you ever feel, because I'm sure there was times where you had plenty of fuck ups too.
Yeah.
Did you ever feel like your job was at risk with Travis, or were you guys just in the trenches together till hell come high water kind of thing?
I mean, maybe my first month, I think we were in China and there was some meeting that was like a low level. He's like, why am I going to this meeting? And I was like, shit, man, maybe I'm going to get fired over this. Or, I made some comments about a bad article that a reporter had written that had blown up on BuzzFeed. Yeah. And I was like, oh crap, but besides those two, which in retrospect were super minor, we were in the trenches. Again, it was this trust. It was this
trust. That trust is the key.
The trust is the key, because that allowed me, and some execs resented it because I had such a close relationship with him. And that's another lesson I learned, is like, there's jealousy when you get too close to the sun among your peers. And that's something to notice, right?
That's a good point.
But it allowed me to have hard conversation with Travis about things that he could do better or the company could do better in private and be effective because of that trust. And that's another thing Bill Gurley knew, but didn't sort of realize that, like, I was actually helping to make sure that we didn't make, more bad decisions. And I was the only one who was effective at it. So, like, you
were the guy kind of making things, keeping it together.
I was doing my best to keep it together, and I didn't succeed all the time, but I succeeded a lot.
Yeah, clearly.
And so that relationship between you and the founder, if you're sort of the number two, is sacrosanct. And I never said a word publicly critical of Travis, haven't yet, and he's still one of my best friends, and I would never. And I respect what he did, and if anything, I defend him, and he doesn't defend himself to the world. Because
I was talking to my buddy who's a Navy SEAL, and he goes, "We'll take there's a 10 out of 10 skill set and 8 out of 10 trust, or 8 out of 10 skill set, 10 out of 10 trust. They'll take the second every time. Like when you're in the trenches with your people, like if you don't have that loyalty and they break, it doesn't matter how skilled they are.
It doesn't, And when greed comes out, when big dollars are at stake, that's where you kind of like actually see how different it is. So when I talk to founders, I tell them all the true stories, like factual. And I just said, just make sure this doesn't happen to you. Here's the questions to ask. Here's the way to test. And you're not going to always get it right. But, their investors, most of the investors, vast majority who invested, Uber raised $15 billion, Benchmark invested $33 million. $14 billion of those dollars were pissed. They were pissed. They invested in us. They didn't want to take money off the table. Benchmark had sort of embedded gains of like $11 billion, and they were about protecting those gains. Everyone else was about growing them.
Conflict there.
Yeah, conflict.
You mentioned, Uber is 160 billion today. I've heard you say that you think Uber should have been at least 600 billion.
Yeah.
In 2020 hindsight, let's pretend you and Travis stayed in the seats. What would you have done differently to be a $600 billion company?
So there are a couple of easy ones at first. Uber was winning against DoorDash by a large margin when we left. Today, Uber is a fraction of the size of DoorDash. And DoorDash worth $50 billion. So we would have been in the lead. That $50 billion would have been ours.
There's another 50.
There's another 50.
Okay.
We also, I think, would have had an Instacart killer. And we would have done it worldwide, not just in the US. That company's worth $10 billion. We would have done that everywhere in the world faster. Now there's copycats all over the world. That would have been another 50. And then I think we would have done, so, now you're talking about like, now you're in the 250, 300 range. I think we would have like conquered Germany, Italy, Spain, Japan, because when the new management came in, their approach was, let's be nice guys. Nice guys doesn't work in ride sharing. And by proof, you've spent 6 years at it and it still hasn't worked. So you would have to done to those countries what you did everywhere else in the world. Those GDP of those countries is enormous. That's $100 billion market cap right there. Have you conquered those countries? And that's when you get to like, okay, now we're in the 400.
So once the new guys came in and, Dara's done his thing, it still had significant growth, but you just feel like it lost like this insane ambition of like grow, dominate. It got a little bit too soft.
Yeah. But like to give Dara credit, and I was very critical of him for years.
Yes, I saw some of your past tweets on him.
Yeah, I was very critical.
So now you have a different opinion of him.
I feel like he's evolved.
Yeah.
And I feel like he's made a lot of good decisions of late. A lot. The bad decisions he made, he bought Postmates, Drizzly, Corner Shop, Jump Bikes. All of them are almost 100% write-offs. That's like $8 billion of dilution the company took. So just an M&A guy, right? And then we were a build it people.
You're a build it.
Yeah. But then he stopped doing those things. Mm-hmm. He still lost to DoorDash. Still hasn't been an Instacart competitor. That failed with Corner Shop. But he did calm the tensions. And one thing I realized that this was our fault is once you stop becoming the insurgent and you're the man, people have a different, more critical view of you. Like everyone's like, yeah, Uber's awesome, and then Uber's evil. They're taking away jobs from taxi drivers. There's an accident that happened here. There's, you become a target.
Yeah.
And we didn't make the turn fast enough to realize that, like, whether you like it or not, you have to be somewhat of a politician in those kinds of roles. You just do. Right? Look at Satya. Satya's a killer underneath at Microsoft, but plays a political game pretty well, right? Sundar, like all these great leaders, they figure out how to balance.
It's game theory to an extent.
It's a little game theory.
You have to game the system at that level.
You have to, right? And we didn't. And Dara, to his credit, is a statesman, and he did well at that. Where the statesman didn't work is conquering countries,
right?
Where it did.
So he needed someone like you to come kind of pair up with him. But again, it'd be hard to do what you did without Travis's permission and motivation and fuel.
The company needed a breather, so to speak.
Right. It was a pretty intense run there, right?
And then it needed to quickly reorient and say, no, we're winning against DoorDash. Let's keep winning. Let's keep going after these countries. But let's do it. And let's do this game theory approach of like, you have to do it, but like shave the edges off it a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think that wasn't what he was skilled at, but he was skilled at diplomacy. He was skilled at financial management. The company's spitting off profits now.
Yeah.
He was skilled at, making the company feel like a loved brand. For a while, it was a hated brand.
Yeah, there was a lot of damage control that had to be done.
And he did that. And now the company in the last year has gone up 100%. Its IPO price was $48. Now it's about $80. And he gets credit for that.
Respect to that.
Yeah.
I want to dive a little bit more into your tactics, right? You're obviously incredible at sales, influence, whatever you want to call that. And that's distinct from deal making and negotiation, right? You're like, hey, they got money, we want it, right? Like, what are some of your tips, your maybe psychology or tactics that you think are imperative to be effective at sales and influence?
So sales, we'll talk about that before, separate from deal making as you laid it out. Sales it's the best salespeople I know, and the times I've been most effective have been when you're mixing charisma and credibility, right? You can't be a great salesperson without some charisma. People wanting to be around you. People wanting to hear what you have to say. People wanting you to come in the office or to get on the phone with you. And I've developed all kinds of tactics over the year. How do you get someone on the phone with you who doesn't want to get on the phone with you? Well, I would find an interesting tidbit that was related to an industry in their company, and I'd email it to them and just let them know constantly I was always thinking about them and interesting ideas. So when they went into their exec meetings, they're like, oh, I had this idea. So I tried to find novel things to push them to build a relationship with them. So I tried not to ask for things as long as possible so that I was a giver.
As many deposits as possible before you have to ask.
And then when I did get in front of them, I tried to be interesting and compelling, but credible. I did my homework. I understood who they were. I understood their company. I read their financials. I watched their advertising. I watched the YouTube of their CEO at TED Talk. I did incredible amounts of research about them, and I did incredible amounts of study on what would make sense as a deal between us and them and what wouldn't make sense and why. So I came in there prepared for every objection. I came there prepared with here's a proposal to start with. Let's see why that doesn't work.
So you're anticipating, okay, this is what they might use as a rebuttal. Like, how would I then?
Or here's why this wouldn't work for them. right? Like
kind of tearing your own proposition apart.
Yeah, tearing your own proposition apart.
Okay, that's interesting.
Right.
So you're walking in prepared. You already kind of know the defense.
Yeah. So like, let me give you an example. So let's suppose the companies have bad earnings.
Okay.
Right. And you're walking in there and you're asking them for money. They're going to be like, dude, did you see the earnings? So I would go in there and say, look, what you're buying from me is going to help your earnings, and here's why. And like or if they had great earnings, I was like, okay, here's how you make sure 8 quarters from now you have the same acceleration. Like I would try to adapt to what they were thinking, and it's not as hard as people think. Especially with public companies, like it's evident by enough reading what's happening at that company and what's being talked around their water cooler. So that's the way I always said, like, what's happening at their water cooler, and how do I make sure what I'm saying is relevant to what's happening?
You're inserting yourself into that relevant conversation.
Yeah,
I love that saying. It's just a blend of confidence and credibility, or charisma and credibility.
Yeah,
charisma and competence.
Yeah,
like just knowing your shit.
Yeah,
and just being a high energy person people want to be around.
Yeah,
it's kind of that simple, huh?
It's that simple. And then the third thing I would say is, how do you force timelines in a way where they don't feel like timelines, right? So
urgency. You need to get shit done now. Urgency. And a lot of people are like, oh, this sounds great.
But here's the mistake people make is like, can you get back to me next week, right? You're like, okay, well, instead of that, how about you say like, well, how many levels of processes go forward to make a decision like this on your side? Let them talk. They're like, well, we have an investment committee, and then we write a memo, and then we present to this. Then I could go like, okay, well, if we started that today, how long would that take? And I have a calendar, like, so in theory, these would be the dates, and then this would when we be signing the contract. They'd be like, yeah, it sounds right. I was like, great. Why don't we like take that schedule and add a month to it for slippage? How does that sound? And we both are on the same page. We push our teams to that goal. And so now you've taken their schedule, you've given them slack, you've given them emotional agreement, like we're going to put our teams together and try to hit that. And then they're like, okay. So now they're emotionally committed to a set of milestones that seem very reasonable because they dictated them and you added slack to them. And then now they're like, feel guilty if they start missing milestones, right?
That is brilliant. That is brilliant. I love that.
Man, I promised Emil I was going to be able to do this and I can't. So they call me up like, man, I'm sorry. And hey, I understand. Why don't we recast the timeline? Always recasting the timeline, always recommitting on an emotional
But you're always driving the conversation to the next steps, and you're always committing. You're always getting a commitment at the end of every call. There's no open-endedness.
No open-endedness, and always working back from the end.
Working back from the end.
Yeah. How many steps?
Same side of the table.
Yes.
Like, hey, let's drive our teams together to get this
yes.
milestone done that we both agree on is very reasonable and practical.
Yeah. And by the way, if we get to milestone X and that person decides I don't want to do this, that's okay. As long as I know by X date, then I can go spend my time elsewhere. So you give them an out. Chinese art of war is always give someone an out so you get an answer faster. And I think some entrepreneurs don't want to hear no, so they'll let a process play out for 6 to 9 months. And by the way, when a process drags out 2-3 times longer than it should, it's a no. Right? So you just misallocating resources at that point. Might as well get the no
sooner. It's like you're texting a girl 20 times, like she doesn't want to see you.
She doesn't want to see you, dude. Sorry. It's an L. Take the L. I was like, bring me the L. I want the L's as fast as possible.
You just want to know the L so you can reallocate your energy. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
So that was a brilliant tip there. On the negotiation side, you call it deal making, right? Like it's really about the art of the deal, creating a win-win where both parties, or maybe not. I'm curious, like what do you say? What is the art of making a great deal, and what's the recipe here?
So negotiation is zero sum. I want this, and it comes out of your pocket, and that's why I say negotiations like at a bazaar. They're trying like the bazaar. You go to someone, they're like $20, and you're like 10, and you settle at 15. That's negotiation. Deal making is finding things that are separately important to me that don't hurt you, and things that are really important to you that don't hurt me. Putting those together in a package where everyone's like, there's enough value here that this deal should happen. Or deal making is also going like, you know what, we added all this up. This doesn't work for you, or it doesn't work for me, or either of us. Let's move on. As opposed to doing a dumb deal, That's like actually doesn't work, and you're going to send your engineers off into la la land.
It's a win-win that doesn't operate under a zero sum, where it's a clear win for both parties.
Yeah, and it's finding these like non-linear value trades. That's really the art. It's like, okay, Uber wanted, for example, I want promotion from Amex. I want a credit for every Amex customer who loads their Amex card into Uber as a free credit. And they want Amex to be an everyday use case. They want everyone to pull their Amex card out every day. So how do I combine those two things to make a deal work? I was like, look, how about this? If someone loads their Amex in, we're going to by default make it their primary card. They're like, that's great. So that means that every time they take an Uber or Uber Eats, they're going to be using that. It's like, yeah. And that makes it a front of wallet card. In exchange, when people do that, you're going to give them a $10 credit every month for doing that. They're like, $10? Easy. I would pay so much more for everyone to use that card every day, because once they use it every day, they use it for groceries, gas, they use it for tons of other things.
And you get to sell that as a benefit to your customers.
Yeah. Use your Amex card.
Triple win.
Yeah, triple. Everyone wins. And they were non-linear. They weren't like arguing over the $10 to $9 or $7 or 12. It was like a different thing. And how do you marry those two? And that requires sort of like looking at a deal holistically and trading value. That's like not hard to calculate on a spreadsheet, as much. Yeah. They're kind of two separate spreadsheets, and then there's the pitch.
You've been in a lot of really high stakes pitches, deal making scenarios with some big hitters where there's billions on the line. Like, how do you handle those really high stress, high stakes scenarios? I know you like to smoke a pack of cigarettes. Used to. Other than that, though, like, what inside of your preparation or your approach, or like, how you handle those engagements, like what was the secrets there?
Besides the preparation and competence piece that we're talking about, which is sort of baseline in any discussion, not even negotiation, deal making,
just baseline.
You're like, you're meeting with the CEO of Tata Motors, you're meeting with the CEO of Chrysler or Mercedes Benz, and you're a threat to them, whatever. Super prepared. I know more about their company than they do. That's my goal, right?
I love that goal.
The other thing is this sort of bearing of confidence, but letting them talk more than listening more than you talk, right? It's like as simple as that in some ways. It's like most people like to talk. If you made it to be CEO of Mercedes-Benz or Ford or Amex or AT&T, you got there by talking. And you get a lot of info when people talk. So if you could be an active listener, and know a lot about what you're talking about, so that when you respond with force and with clarity and with intelligence and confidence. This is the bearing piece, which is sort of a derivative of charisma. It's like not being intimidated.
How do you build that? How do you think you build confidence? Do you think it comes from competence? Like when you just really know your shit, you walk in with a different level of confidence? Is it some sort of mental preparation or experience? Like, how do you think I imagine your confidence probably skyrocketed throughout your career when you're first starting out doing your first deal. Is it just getting the reps in, or like how do you think you build confidence?
There's definitely some part of getting the reps in, right? Because there's definitely some part, and Uber accelerated because like you were meeting prime ministers and all these people, so like over time you just sort of bake the confidence into, this is not more important than the last 10 things I've done, so I can treat it as that way. But if I had to like, oh my, it's a pleasure to meet you, President Modi. Like I turned it on when I needed to be turned on because I knew they needed that, right? It was so in some ways being able to control your own emotions,
emotional regulation,
and being able to turn on the charm, being able to turn on the listening engine, being able to turn on the intellectual part of the competence piece, learning which part of your personality and your skill set to turn on when. That is a skill, and that comes with some reps. It comes with the preparation, but it also comes with the rarely are any one meeting do or die.
So you can kind of take the pressure off. Like, look, there's a lot of meetings. Like this is a big meeting, but there's 1,000 more meetings.
We're going to do the best. I want to walk into that meeting knowing we've done everything we can to prepare to make this meeting the best it can. And if a curveball gets thrown, we couldn't anticipate, like, if we can't anticipate it, then we can't anticipate it. So let's go in there.
So you're kind of just detaching from the outcome to some extent?
A little bit.
And saying, hey, like, this is what we want. This is our intention, but we're just going to do our best. We're going to prepare as hard as we can, come in with the right intentions, and whatever happens, happens. We'll learn from it if worst case.
Yeah, we'll be there and we're going to turn on personality traits.
Did you guys have like a game plan? Like, all right, you're this guy, I'm playing this guy. Like, or was it just like, did you have a particular intention when you walked into the meetings, or how was this set up?
And fundraising stuff, yes, we had roles.
Okay.
Right? Most other meetings is a little less planned than that, but in fundraising, which is, and it was, it was written about in the book, and it was in the Showtime series. We call it the Home Show, right? Okay, so we would ask people to come to our office as opposed to go to them. That was a little bit of a power move for an entrepreneur to do, but we were so hot that people were willing to travel from wherever, even 40 miles from Sand Hill Road, where usually they're used to entrepreneurs doing that. So that was like one power dynamic that we created. The other power dynamic was very hard to get to Travis, easy to get to me. So I was super responsive to all the investors, and then it made sure they got through a few hoops before they got to Travis, because Travis was the talent. It's like the Taylor Swift.
So you kind of built him up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
right?
Okay.
But they knew, I made sure people knew I was close enough to him where, like, I could get an answer in 10 minutes if I needed to from Travis. So they knew that, like, I was effectively, when they were speaking to me, they were speaking to the company, right? And then we had our head of finance, who was, the unemotional numbers guy. Here are the numbers. I'm going to give you the spreadsheet. You can plug in whatever assumptions you want, discount them, whatever. We were like, here's our model. You can tear it apart. Like, so we were very, I hate using the word transparency. Everyone uses that. We were very like, if you don't believe us, fine, do your own math.
Like show don't tell kind of thing. Like,
yeah, it was sort of like, people send doc sends now, so you can't copy the decks, whatever. Like, here's the financial model, unlocked. Go do what you want with it. We wouldn't give them the deck because that was our presentation. That was like the special sauce. But that was our storytelling. But so we had 3 different roles in that thing, and then I was the closer, right? I did the auction, right?
You were always auctioning, leveraging people against each other, getting the best deals.
Yeah, and again, it was the idea that Travis and I agreed on, is that at the end we got to a price that everyone who paid it thought was market, because I told them this is what other people are willing to pay. If you're not, totally get it. And we didn't stretch. We figured out what the top price someone will pay is, and we took one step back, so it wasn't risky. And like, I remember our first deal, which was $17 billion valuation after $3.5 billion. So the next, went from 3.5 to 17 billion in months.
5x.
Yeah. And I knew we could get 18, but we were like, let's take 17, oversubscribe the round a little bit, de-risk that anyone gets wobbly, and let's close that. And we perfected this thing. And at the end, people are like, I can't believe I paid 17. I was like, well, you didn't have to. And at the end, everyone made money. Every single person who invested in Uber and Held made a ton of money. And our employees got the least dilution possible. Everyone appreciated the transparent price. No one ever said I didn't get enough data to make the right decision. So it worked. It worked.
That's incredible. You worked with Travis very closely for 4 years. You're still best friends to this day. I think he's one of the most fascinating, iconic founders in the history of the world. Being in that close proximity to him, in the trenches with him, what are some of the best lessons that you learned from Travis, both directly and just through osmosis of working with him?
I think the most important thing I learned from him was this courage to be ambitious thing. This whole thing of like, this works. We have product market fit. Let's launch everywhere we can right now. And I was like, well, but that seems hard. And he's like, so, it's so what? And I was like, we don't have enough money. He's like, go get the money then. I was like, okay. And I was like, but we're not legal in these places. He's like, we'll become legal. So it was the start with the end in mind, and just like keep going until you're stopped. And that relentlessness, the sort of like push on every front until someone stops you, was something I really like got by osmosis and directly from him, and it was a really life lesson for me. And in this why not piece, like why not, why not, and this is why the lift guys limped along, is because they were always asking why should we do that as opposed to why not. And so that was one thing. The other thing was he used to say, don't get attached to the outcome, get attached to the process. And so this part, you were talking about the meetings, the high-end meetings. He's like, don't get attached to what might or might not happen. Get attached to the process. So the process is we're gonna do all this work. We're gonna know their company better than them. We're gonna know the water cooler. We're gonna come up with a proposal for the first meeting. We're gonna do all the process stuff, and we're gonna discover what their approval process. We're gonna do all these things, and whatever happens, happens. And same with fundraising. It's like, I don't care what the valuation is as long as it's market price. So let's not get attached to a number. Let's go through the process, and when a number is, it is. And that was a very powerful lesson to learn.
Focus on the dribbling and shooting, and the score will take care of itself.
Yeah, focus on being the fastest, being the best shot, passing, dribbling, all those things.
Yeah. Do
the best you can in all those things. If you're like, we're going to score 100 points this game, well, that might be a loser. I don't know. Like, don't focus on, all the elements that go into winning.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I love this idea you mentioned of the courage to be ambitious, because I feel like that really, the level of your courage is the level you live your life at.
Yeah.
Right. You're never going to live a life beyond your level of courage.
Yeah.
But I know early days, your parents didn't really support you. In some of your endeavors financially, and like, did they question your decisions to go into tech, or how? Like, I'm curious.
I didn't have that. I didn't have tiger parents that wanted me necessarily. Like, sure, they wanted me to be a doctor, but they kind of trusted that I was making good decisions.
They kind of figured it out.
Yeah.
But it takes a lot for you, I think, to go on this journey in Uber, right? Like, this is a Herculean effort that has a high chance of failure.
Yeah.
Right. So, like, what advice do you have for the aspiring entrepreneurs out there, the people that are at the first leg of their journey that are like, dude, this shit just seems so hard. Like, am I just going to waste all my time for nothing? What advice do you have to those people?
Two bits of advice that I think are important. One is taking risk gets harder as you get older. So if your mindset is like, well, I'm going to do this safe thing for a while and then I'll build up some cash and then I'll do this, you'll never do that. Risk gets harder as your lifestyle adapts to the safe path, and your life gets more complicated. Marriage, kids, aging parents, comfort, comfy, right? Yeah. You got to make VP, so now you can ride business class, like all these things, right? Risk taking is much easier when you're younger. That job that pays you whatever, the comfortable top 5% salary will always be there. It'll always be there. So start with so your time matters. So take the biggest risk when you're younger. Second thing is, and this is for founders, not necessarily for execs, is don't be a founder for the sake of being a founder. You have to have a good idea, and you have to believe in it. You have to have a little bit of a reality distortion field because it's so hard that you have to power through. You have to be convincing to other people to join the company, to investors, to customers, to whoever. And you have to believe in that idea so much, and it has to be so important to you that you have longevity. And now, for a while, it was sexy to be a founder. It's just like, I'm founding, a nightclub in the metaverse. Give me $20 million, right? I'm founding blockchain for, whatever. Yeah. And it was like a money grab, and people have to be much more serious. And I do think you're going to see a contraction in the number of companies started because the free money the lack of free money now is going to concentrate on believers and better ideas and resilience. And that's like not for everyone. Like I've never been the founder, and it's because I don't have the product and tech I'm not a product and tech guy. Can't write code, right? And I think
that's great self-awareness though, because I'm sure your outcome was 1,000 times better finding the best guy in the world and just partnering and using your skills and your gifts.
I was okay with that. it's just me. Like, I am good at these things and I can get better at these things. I will never write great code. It will never happen.
Right.
And my product instincts are terrible. Steve Jobs I am the person Steve Jobs doesn't want to talk to, because I'd be like, do this button and this button, you know, because I think I want it. No. But Travis had those good instincts, and I complimented those. So when you're wanting to be a founder or a leader, like, be self-aware and make sure whoever you're partnering with, if you're exec, has the resilience and believes in the idea.
Wholeheartedly.
Right?
You've got to have crazy passion to get through all the craziness.
Yes.
I'm curious, this level of ambition, when you're out here to change the world, build an industry, defining company, category creator of sorts, what's the trade-off? What's the downside of all this? You know what I mean? Because I feel like, look, this is glamorized. There's a great Netflix show on you.
Terrible Netflix show.
Thoroughly enjoyed it, although you probably, I'm sure you had some qualms about how you were presented, I'm sure. But, you know, I think this is glamorized. Everyone wants to go be the next Sam Altman, the next Elon, the next Travis, and go change the world. But I don't think everyone understands what that takes. What are the downsides, the trade-offs when you're working 1 billion hours a week and going through this much stress? Like, what kind of impact and trade-offs did that have on you?
Yes. Well, for the record, that Netflix show is the Bill Gurley story. The producer of that show refused to talk to Travis.
No way.
Because if he said that didn't happen, that would be defamation. So, like, we're going to take the book that was written.
So it's pretty inaccurate?
Oh my God. It was 70% inaccurate.
I've got to talk to you offline and figure out what was real there.
I'll give you the tidbits. And you know, the benchmark people talk to them a lot, so it was their version. But aside from that, I'd say that the sacrifices are, I didn't get married until I was 45. So I'm 51 now. I have a 5-month-old, so I'll be 70 when my second kid goes to college. So a large part of my life, I didn't sort of prioritize. I don't regret it because I'm happy, but my aging parents are now old, so I moved them down here to Miami. But like, I just couldn't keep up with the personal life and do what I was doing. It was impossible. So to some extent, that's a sacrifice, right? I smoked like a dog until 2017, when, you know, whatever stress reliever. I wasn't Jack Dorsey who could Zen. I wish I was. Yeah. But my habits weren't healthy, you know. So most people's habits aren't healthy. Very few people get into Zen mode. So I think your health can be affected. And I also think you have to make such hard decisions. Like, sometimes you start a company with a buddy and he's not the right guy, and like the pain of having that end, you know, some relationships get hurt by that. Not because you wanted to hurt the relationship, just because it wasn't right for the business, because you, as a leader of a business, you owe your loyalty to the business, right? So those things were sacrifices, and there's some amount of luck in it. And so you could end up making all those sacrifices and not end up in a great spot.
Right. You might have some skills, but you don't get the outcome you wanted. Because I'm just curious too, because I've been in that position, launched my company 4 years ago. It's 7 days a week, and it's been all the way. And with the vision we've casted, I'm in this seat for at least another 6 to 8 years. Yeah. And I'm like, am I going to look back and regret how much time I'm pouring into work and neglecting certain relationships? I mean, having a romantic relationship's been next to impossible. Like, I can recruit any executive, but I somehow can't recruit a wife. But I'm looking at you, and you've walked the path. Like, is it worth it, or is it worth having a slightly more balance, or is it just a game of self-awareness?
I just don't believe in balance, right? So in terms of there being some theoretical balance that everyone should try to adapt to,
formula that you can somehow reach. Yeah.
Right. I do not regret what I did. I accept the consequences of it.
You signed the contract with yourself.
That is not for everybody. Everyone has to find their own balance, so to speak. Yeah. But anyone who's under the illusion that you could somehow do it all is not going to succeed, because it's not possible. It is not possible. You cannot build what Elon built without sacrifice in some way. You cannot do what Sam Altman did. You can't do what Travis did. You can't do what I did. Every one of them sacrificed different things. And Elon has a lot of kids and families, so like that, he figured out how to do that and do what he's doing. Mm-hmm. You know, but there's sacrifice involved, but this notion that I want weekends and evenings off, and that's like the standard everyone should
Go work
like,
at Google, right?
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
not reality.
It's not reality.
If you want to be on a curve, if you want to be on an exponential curve.
Yeah.
But some people don't, and that's okay.
Totally fine.
It's totally
You just got to
fine.
find the right environment.
Yeah,
It's like find the right environment for you.
Which comes back to self-awareness.
Self-awareness.
Right? Are you self-aware about what you want?
Yeah.
And think about that a lot. So when
Yeah.
people call me and say, I'm ready for the next step in my career, I'm like, okay, let's do the test. Here's the quiz. How hard do you want to work or willing to work? Where do you want to be? And where do you need to be? Because location matters in tech. Are you willing to build desks like at a startup that's like hammering desks? Or do you need something that's a little more advanced? And what work are you going to get up every morning and go like, thank God I get to do this work? Like, what kind of order the things? And you get some answers to those questions, and then you can say, okay, well, this is the kind of person, and this is my advice on what you should look at and do. And be honest with yourself. Don't tell me you can work nonstop and whatever. Like, if you have to say, I put my kids to bath time at 6, and then I have dinner, I'm back online by night, and as long as it takes, I'm up at night. Okay,
Cool.
right? Then
Works for me.
yeah, works for me. Works. You can make something work and be intense like that.
Yeah.
If you're like, look, every weekend I shut down because my kids' basketball games, and those are the precious times. I'm like, okay, that's fine. Here's the kind of like the best environment for someone like who has those kind of balance elements to it.
On the topic of self-awareness,
Yeah.
if you look at the span of your career, we start out, we have ambitions, but we have blind spots. We don't know what we don't know about ourselves yet that's preventing us from getting to where we want to go.
Yeah.
Right? So when you look at the span of your career, what was your biggest blind spot or like insecurity or weakness that you really had to overcome to become who you are today?
So I'm naturally an introvert. I'm like,
Really?
Yes.
You're not bullshitting me. You're an introvert.
If 1 to 10, extrovert is 10, introvert's 1. I'm like a 3.5, 4. Right. So
I would have never guessed that.
So for me, or sales, biz dev takes energy. It consumes energy, and turning it on is something I've learned how to do, and it's just a weak spot I worked on for decades to be able to know how to do it. And then I crawl into my cubbyhole, like turn out the lights, and then I like read news or something like gnarly but it's happening in the world, and I go aside.
Yeah.
So that was like one thing, and it was real. I knew it was valuable, and I had to do it, right? And then the other thing, I guess, is, and again, this goes back to the question I asked before, is the blind spot I had was really that, like, when there's just dollars at stake, I've never believed that human beings can change on a dime when big dollars are at stake. And one of my friends calls it the last trade. If there's a big enough amount of money at stake, and this is someone's last trade, they'll go all in to get that money. Whatever it takes, burn every bridge, every relationship, do anything and say anything to get to that amount. And maybe that's a little bit of a tech phenomenon because the dollars are so big running around that sector right now. And for the last 20 years.
Money just reveals, though.
Yeah,
just reveals
it really does. It does. And I didn't think it affected the best of the best, but it affects everybody.
So that's interesting. So a few last questions before we wrap up. You've changed dramatically from when you started Uber to when you exited Uber.
Yeah.
Right? You had a huge evolution there. So when you were starting out, how did you view success at that point in time? And then sitting here now, how has that idea or definition of success changed?
So I remember whiteboarding with Travis in that famous whiteboarding session. And he was like, look, I think this could be a $20 billion company. I was like, come on, man. Like, let's do some math, right? And we were arguing between 10 and 20 bill, right? And then that was before we started getting into the ambition piece of this. I was like, okay, let's throw away the numbers. What can this be? And then let's put ideas on this urban logistics network, and how big are those? And then we started to go then we both were like, oh, okay. Now we both had a little bit of a revelation. So success at that point was reaching a dollar amount, and and Uber changed me to being something that people would never forget. and people will never forget Uber. It touches them every day or every week in some way. Billions of people around the world, or at least hundreds of millions of people. And whether the company and my stock was valued at 100 billion or 50 or whatever, we made a dent in the universe, and that success is as meaningful to me as the financial outcome of that. So that changed me. Today's success for me, and it's hard because I'm fortunate, right? So now I have the opportunity to think about bigger things that don't involve money. Whether, looking at our education system, looking at our justice system, looking at, our immigration, like thinking about big ideas and being around people who have the ability to move those ideas. When I was on my front nine, now I'm on my back nine, right? My front nine, success was about financial reward, and it became making a dent in the universe and being known for doing something extraordinary. And now it's about like making the world, a little better place, as cheesy as that is. But I have that luxury now. That's no luxury.
That's kind of your hero's journey, though. Yeah. You had to go do something and become something extraordinary, kind of self-actualize before you could self-transcend and really focus outward and like, how can I improve the world fully now? Yeah,
exactly. And that's a little bit of a luxury.
But it's an earned luxury.
It's an earned luxury, but you
earned that.
But it is something that, I am fortunate to have.
Yeah.
Part earned, part luck, but it wouldn't have come without the work. That's for sure. But that is not something that, there are people who do nonprofits and all this stuff earlier in their life, and God bless them, right? But I chose to do it more in serial step.
Yeah.
Right.
So before I ask my last question, where can our audience find you, engage with you online?
I'm most engaged on X, so at Emil Michael, my full name, EMILMICHAEL. That's where I'm sort of a Twitter addict and X addict, so that's where people find me.
Cigarettes picked up Twitter.
Scrolling and doom scrolling at night. No, but that sort of thing. I don't use LinkedIn that much, so I have hundreds of unread or untouched invites there. So,
that's how we got connected, so I'm glad you responded to mine.
Was it LinkedIn?
I LinkedIn'd you.
Okay. I think you popped up on the focus tab, so I was like, okay, I should check this out. And I live around the corner, so it was a great thing to meet a fellow Miamian now.
Yes.
So that's how to reach me.
So Twitter, okay, X. So for me, being world class, it's less about a single outcome. It's about a constant journey of striving to become more. Right. I think striving to become great and achieving a life of greatness in how you live your life for me is the ultimate gift and honor. But I think it's all about striving towards your next version of yourself. That could be business, it could be family, but always working towards this next greater version of you. So I'm curious for you, after all you've accomplished now, what does your next level look like?
What was important to me after ignoring those personal issues for so long was like really doubling down on them in this part of my life. So I moved my parents from New York to Miami to be close to their grandkids. I had grandkids. I was like, I don't know if I'll have kids. So I'm very focused on making sure that personal fulfillment happens. And for some people it doesn't, and it's a little sad. You can, in Miami, you see a lot of the single folk who maybe had a broken marriage and they're here and they're not finding the fulfillment they need
in those relationships.
In those relationships. So those are pretty important to me. The other thing is finding a way to make a dent in the universe. But actually the thing I do most of now, and it sounds crazy, is like for free, I get 10 calls a week that I take from founders for one reason or another, to give them some bit of the advice that we talked about today, to make sure that like I save them some time, some energy, some pain, point them toward a greater acceleration path. And Bill Campbell was my mentor. He was called, there was a book written about him called the Trillion Dollar Coach. He was Legend. Steve Jobs' coach. He was Larry Page and Sergey's coach and Eric Schmidt at Google. And they were literally competitors, but he was in both management meetings every week because they both trusted him so much. It was an inspiration to me. And so I aspire to pay it forward back to other entrepreneurs the way he did to me. So I think a lot of 2 a.m. phone calls and stress situations with people I don't know because someone said, hey man, this guy's in a tough spot. He's got an offer on the table, or he's running out of money, or he's trying to hire this exec or whatever. So I try to be useful to the community that made me successful. And it's been a fair amount of time on that. My wife's like, who were you just talking to? I was like, and I get a lot of satisfaction out of that, because if I can help just a little bit, and all it takes is sometimes a word of encouragement or a strategy, or here's a reference, or talk to this person, or you might consider hiring this person, just a little bit, you could really, and they never forget that. They will never forget they got on the phone with Emil, Michael, and he helped. And that makes me happy.
I love that, man. You've really earned this. You've got such a cool story, and you're just such a genuine guy. It makes sense why you had all the success you have. So thanks for being so open. I appreciate you just sharing the story, the highs, the lows.
Thanks.
Giving us some great advice. I think a lot of founders, operators, dreamers out there are going to love this. Get a lot of inspiration from it. So thanks again for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good luck with the business, man. The 4 years. Those are 4 dog years. It's like 28 years, and you got 5, 6 more times 7.
I'll be about 80 by the time I exit.
Right. But you look like you're taking care of your body, and that's good. You don't look like a smoker. So thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Emil.
All right.
Hey, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the World Class Podcast. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe across all our platforms. Hit that notification bell so you can get updates on our new episodes, and we'll see you next week.